folks. My name is... Oh, can we start? What's happening right now? Wait a minute. Do you hear that? What's that racket? I'm supposed to be recording an itch. Oh my goodness. Here's your host, RKslade.
Hey, what's up, folks? My name is Russ, also known as RKslade, coming at you with another episode of Fallout and About. I hope you're doing well wherever you might be today, whether you're in the bog harvesting some berries for a delicious cranberry relish, scrapping 72 coffee cups for ceramic scrap, or just doing a little research with the forced evolutionary virus in an attempt to create super mutants to replace synths. In this week's episode, we'll be talking about different moments in time in the Fallout universe. Every few episodes, we'll pick smaller, almost insignificant moments from the timeline and flesh them out with a little discussion and background information. One of the things I love about the Fallout universe is that we can jump into these little terminal and journal entries and find little stories filled with lots of humanity. And that is what I think continues to draw me back to the lore of Fallout. The developers did a great job painting these great little moments in time. Most of our moments will actually correlate to dates on or around the week that the podcast is released. So in this episode, we take a few moments from this week in August in the Fallout timeline, but each of those individual moments take place in different years. Up first, we've got an entry from the Parsons State Insane Asylum, which comes to us from the world of Fallout 4, which can be accessed in the year 2287, 110 years after the Great War.
Patient N7NJK, name, Smith, Robert Bobby, birth date, November 23, 2064, date of admittance, the 10th of August, 2074, length of treatment, 8 years. Location, Isolation Ward, Room 01, Condition, Special, assigned to, Superintendent Cabot. Notes, patient remanded into the custody of Superintendent Cabot by the Massachusetts Department of Juvenile Services. Patient's family is local, refuses to visit, happily admits to his crime, multiple homicide stabbing. Treatment, music therapy Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor only piece known to stop his laughter, which is nearly constant.
So what's interesting about this little story within the greater world of Fallout is that it paints a chilling picture of a disturbed young man named Bobby Smith, who was admitted to Parsons on August the 10th, 2074. I'm not sure when the entry was made, but we're looking at the date that little Bobby was admitted to Parsons, and so that's August the 10th. 2074. Now we know his date of birth is about 10 years earlier in 2064, so when he was admitted, he had already committed multiple homicides by stabbing. Some details of the entry that we can discuss are his length of treatment. If you connect the dots here, we've got an admittance date of 2074. This is only 3 years before the bombs dropped, so the question at hand is, did he actually stay in care for 8 years, or was he killed when the bombs dropped, or did he somehow escape into the wasteland? If he was 10 years old when he was admitted, then that 8 years might just be a reference to the amount of time that he was likely to stay before he was moved to a prison or something. We don't really know specifically. Some folks like to try and connect little Bobby Smith to Fallout 3's pint-sized slasher, not to be confused with the hash-slinging slasher of SpongeBob lore. See, the pint-sized slasher was basically an urban legend used by parents to scare their kids into behaving. But sometime in 2052, 12 years before Bobby Smith was even born, Walter Streetbeat Monroe, a staff writer for the Capitol Post, wrote a story about the Linden Street slayings. He alleged that the murderer in these cases was a small child. According to an eyewitness report from the one surviving victim, the assailant was a clown. So, is our little homicidal maniac the pint-sized slasher? I personally don't think so, but at the very least, it's these little details in the games that get us all speculating and discussing, right? Now, something else that really piqued my interest when learning about this Bobby Smith character. He is laughing all the time. Kind of reminds you of the classic villain from the Batman series, the Joker. In fact, the records of patients at Parsons also include a vigilante named Night War, which is probably a hat tip to Batman himself, a woman who dressed in black leather who could only be a Catwoman homage, and of course our 10-year-old murderer who is always laughing kind of a traditional tell of someone with maniacal tendencies, at least in the movies, is that they can't stop laughing hysterically, right? That's a big sign of crazy. Here's another little parenthesis. Parsons State Insane Asylum is based on Danvers State Insane Asylum in Danvers, Massachusetts. H.P. Lovecraft's Arkham Sanitarium was believed to be inspired by Danvers State. And we are familiar with Batman's Arkham Asylum, which is almost guaranteed to be inspired by Lovecraft's Arkham Sanitarium. There's a neat little connection there, in parentheses. But back to Bobby Smith, the little laughing murderer. Here's what's so cool about his entry, at least to me. He's always laughing, and the only way that he can be calmed down is when Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor is played. Alright, yay for music therapy. This is a fun little detail because we often associate this tune, especially the beginning of it, with old-fashioned scary or sinister moments in movies. Probably the most well-known uses of this haunting Bach piece is the 1954 Disney movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, when Captain Nemo plays it on the pipe organ. I'll admit I'm more of a Beethoven fan, but Johann Sebastian Bach, who was born in 1685 and died in 1750, was a prolific composer and musician of the Baroque period. The way that I see this story moment in the Fallout timeline is that a piece of music that is often associated with maniacal and scary moments is really the only thing that will calm this hysterical child down. It's pretty intriguing when you think about it. And here's a sad part about this entry, one that opens the door for lots of emotion and even more questions. It's that we learn that little Bobby's family is local and that they refuse to visit. They won't even come see him. Don't get me wrong, the kid is pretty far gone after happily admitting to his crimes, but the thought of a 10-year-old who is so mentally disturbed and that they commit such atrocities seems to indicate that his family had possibly figuratively abandoned him many years before, and that's pretty sad stuff. Our next moment in time from the Fallout universe comes from Fallout 76 and happens on August the 12th, 2096. That's 19 years after the Great War. It's an entry from a terminal in the AVR Medical Center. Dr. Claire Hudson is the responder's chief medical officer. Her research includes developing a cure for the Scorched plague as part of the inoculation project.
Short entry today. Why? Because I really only did one thing, and it wasn't research. No, my day was spent hiding from a pack of Scorched that invaded the hospital this morning. Most of them stayed up on the ground floor, but a few wandered down here. It's a good thing I heard them, because I barely had time to hole up in the closet when they started searching around in the lab. It occurs to me that we know almost nothing about the Scorched. What motivates them? Do they eat? Why are they hostile toward everything that isn't one of them? Eventually the Scorched moved on, and by eventually, I mean 9 hours later. I never want to set foot in a storage closet again.
So, what we know about her efforts are that she is working on a vaccine in an effort to prevent the Scorch from crossing the Savage Divide. She's trying to get it completed in time to deliver it to the fire breathers who are trying to seal Big Bend Tunnel to try and keep the Scorched out. Unfortunately, a fuse blows in the symptomatic machine she is using and she is not able to find a replacement. She gets word that the responders are making their last stand against the Scorched at Morgantown Airport. Without a finished vaccine, she decides to abandon her post and try to make it to the airport to help any responders who might still be alive. She does, however, leave instructions for the vaccine, hoping it might help someone that might find them in the future. So this whole story plays out over several months, but we get that entry from August the 12th, which really gives us some insight into what it was like as the Scorched are rampaging through Appalachia. She's holed up in a closet for most of the day when she could be doing important research and work on the vaccine. She has lots of time to contemplate different thoughts about the Scorched, like what motivates them, do they eat, are they hostile toward everything that isn't one of them? I've often thought about those same things. That's a pretty cool little story.
Well, excuse me, sir, but I have uncovered an interesting tidbit referring to some sort of time and space rift that joins the universe of Fallout with the real-world universe.
Well, I'm not really sure how all that works, but let's just say that the only reason I'm able to even interact with you, Goober, is that there's some sort of reality portal and time machine thing happening with this podcast. we'll just willfully suspend any disbelief to make it work.
Affirmative, sir. I originate from a parallel universe, one in which a divergence occurred from what you know as your universe sometime after World War II. But here we are communicating over time, space, and distance. And as you know, sir, I'm an avid collector of data and useful information.
That's right, Goober. So, as Mr. Slade would say, what little bit of useless information do you have for us today, Goo?
Well, sir, I think it's something that you and your listeners won't find alien. In fact, you'll want to face this one head on. I've discovered a connection between our universes. In the AVR Medical Center, one finds a stretcher with Jangles the Moon Monkey on it. A toy alien lies across his face. In your universe, there is a movie series in which a character named Kane dies when a facehugger leaps onto his face, wraps its tail around the neck, and implants an alien embryo which later emerges from the victim's chest and abdomen. A gruesome way to go.
Well, thanks for that, Goober. So there are probably tons of these little details throughout the Fallout games that we can find, little Easter eggs that call back to our own pop culture. In that particular case, in the AVR Medical Center, you can find Jangles the Moon Monkey on a stretcher with an alien, a toy alien on his face, which obviously is a reference to the movie Alien. That's pretty cool. Let's do one more little story moment from the Fallout timeline that I think is hilarious. This one comes to us from Flatwoods in Appalachia, and it's also from Fallout 76. This is a short but sweet little terminal entry from the Flatwoods terminal from Dr. Adam Veen, who actually travels to Flatwoods looking for medical help from the responders. Here's what he says. August the 14th, 2096. I have been eating nothing but Blamco mac and cheese, sugar bombs, and Instamash with Nuka-Colas for years, even before the bombs. But lately it seems to give me the shakes. I'm a doctor, though. A doctor of philosophy, not medicine. So I came here to see if anyone could tell me if there's something I can take for the stomach aches and shakes. That right there tells such a great story in just a few sentences. Unfortunately for him, the responders have already abandoned Flatwoods, and by this point, only a handful of townspeople remain. Now, we don't actually know if he got something specifically for his stomach aches and shakes, but we do see and hear from Dr. Adam Veen a little bit later in a few more entries, so it is interesting, and I think it's just funny. Such a neat little story, a neat little detail that the writers and the developers added in there. All right, let's do some community questions. If you'd like to ask a question, head over to facebook.com/RKslade Gaming and shoot me a message, or leave a voice message at anchor.fm/RKslade. Goober is going to take us through this week's community questions. Take it away, Goober.
Today's first question comes from Andres in California. He asks, can Fallout 4 still get another DLC? Should it have a new one for the new-gen consoles? If so, what would you like to see?
That's a great question, and as someone who is still playing a lot of the Fallout 4 content for the first time, it's something I hadn't really thought too much about until now. I'm about 99% sure that Bethesda is done creating new DLC content for Fallout 4. The 6 existing expansion packs were released once a month starting in April of 2016, so over 4 years ago. Those are Automatron, Wasteland Workshop, Far Harbor, Contraptions Workshop, Vault Tech Workshop, and Nuka World. That being said, the Fallout modding community is really still the place to go. They're still faithfully churning out new, unofficial content. So back to your question though, I'd love to see a remastered Fallout 3 or New Vegas and maybe even Fallout 4 for next gen consoles. I think it would be pretty cool to see a few more DLCs pop up along with that. I doubt that will actually happen though, as Bethesda seems content to support Fallout 4 but only with patches these days. All of their Fallout resources pretty much seem to be flowing into Fallout 76. But if I could see a new location for either a Fallout 4 DLC or even a new Fallout game, it would be somewhere like Europe, or maybe even more where I'm from in the southeastern part of the United States. In the Fallout universe, that area would be known as the Southeast Commonwealth and the Gulf Commonwealth, and that basically covers states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas north and south. But I think it would be really cool to see cities like Atlanta, Savannah, Charleston, maybe even New Orleans, Jacksonville, and Orlando somehow brought into the Fallout universe in a major way. So it would be kind of cool to see maybe what redneck ghouls act like. That would be pretty cool. Who knows, Andres? Maybe we'll get a Fallout China, or maybe even a Fallout from South America. I think the possibilities are wide open. Good question.
A good question indeed, sir. On to our next community question, which comes from Brittany in Washington. She asks, what's the origin of the Scorched Beast? Where does the Scorched Plague come from?
So this is kind of a fun which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of a question. But before we dive in, we kind of have to define which is the chicken and which is the egg. Is it the Scorched Beast that came first, or the plague that came first? Is a Scorched Beast a giant chicken, or I'm kind of confusing myself. Goober, can you help me out a little bit here?
Of course, sir. According to my vast and all-encompassing data collection, I was able to determine that the chicken versus egg causality dilemma is a metaphoric adjective describing situations where it is not evident which of two events should be considered the cause and which should be considered the effect. In the 1st century Greek philosopher Plutarch posed the question as a philosophical matter in his essay The Symposiacs. Several centuries earlier, Aristotle concluded that it was an infinite sequence with no conclusion. Most references to this paradox seem to refer to the origins of first cause, that is, the beginning of the world.
Okay, Goober, that's not really what I meant, but thanks for that lesson in Greek philosophy.
I aim to please, sir.
Well, whether or not the Scorched Beast is a giant chicken or a big egg, I guess it's not really up for debate, because we actually have some information available to us that points us in the right direction. The first Scorched Beast was accidentally created when scientists from the Enclave experimented on bats. In early 2083, they exposed irradiated bats to biochemical experiments. What that actually means might be up for interpretation, but we have one little detail from Arctos Pharma that might tie a few things together. There is a holotape in Arctos that seems to imply that they might be responsible for the research and work that the Enclave, specifically Thomas Eckart, used as a basis of some sort to create the Scorched Plague. It's highly likely that the biochemical experiments that the Enclave based their work on were straight out of Arctos Pharma's laboratories. So, long story short, the Scorched Beasts were accidentally created when Enclave scientists were doing secret, shady experiments. The reason, however, for these experiments was that Thomas Eckart wanted a way to trick the monitoring systems into believing that they were under some sort of attack, so that the alert level would be raised to DEFCON 1. That would give him access to the nuclear arsenal so that he could enact revenge against the Chinese. Side note here, Eckart was pretty deranged in his drive to become president and leader of the Enclave. His main motivation was using this attack on Appalachia as a catalyst in his fight against communism. In 2086, he was actually able to unleash the Scorched Beast into the wild, tricking the region's monitoring system into believing that an invasion was underway, which basically granted him authority and access to those nukes. Even though they keep them pretty much contained and in underground mining facilities up until this point, we know that as early as 2084, just a year after the Scorched Beasts were created, that they are somehow coming to the surface and being seen by the inhabitants of Appalachia. Sam Blackwell says he saw a bat the size of a Corvega flying over the ridge. It chases him, and luckily he falls into a small ditch where the Scorched Beast couldn't quite get to him. After a while, it gives up and flies away, leaving him grateful to be alive. Now, if giant mutated and biochemically enhanced bats the size of cars coming out of the ground and flying around the landscape aren't terrifying enough, there's the plague. It's called the Scorched Plague, and it is responsible for all the scorched creatures you find in Appalachia, including former humans. According to the research of the Vault 76 overseer, the plague is believed to come from some sort of fungus that grows in the underground colonies of the Scorched beasts. The Scorched plague rages through Appalachia between the years 2085 and 2102. It wipes out almost every single human except those who are sheltering in Vault 76. The vicious mutation that turns the bats into ferocious, gigantic predators has also resulted in them secreting a virulent plague that turns certain other living or deceased creatures into their thralls. Now, some of this info is coming to us from the Fallout wiki on fandom.com. It's one of my favorite places to go for info. Those that come into contact with a Scorched beast may begin to mutate if the plague takes hold, beginning with the victim's skin turning dark, almost black with the smell of ash. The process culminates in lesions that burn with intense heat beginning to form on the victim's body. The affected creature appears to be covered in smoldering embers. In the case of humans, higher mental function eventually disappears, replaced by extreme, almost animalistic aggression. One thing to note is that these Scorched are not your run-of-the-mill feral ghouls. In fact, they're not really ghouls at all. They retain enough presence of mind to wield weapons and even speak intelligibly. Feral ghouls seem to be immune to the Scorched plague, though. Super mutants and bees also appear to be resistant to the plague. And that is pretty interesting stuff if you dig into it a little deeper. Basically, in Fallout 76, the Scorched and the Scorched Beast Queen, which is an even bigger Scorched Beast, are a big part of the storyline. I highly recommend it if you haven't played it yet. But I won't give away any gameplay spoilers because it's a real blast. There's a whole lot more to talk about when it comes to the Scorched and Scorched Beast, but I hope that opens up the pages a little bit more on that topic. Thanks for that question, Brittany. If you'd like to leave me a voice message with a community question, head on over to anchor.fm/RKslade, where you'll find on that hub page a little button that says message. And if you're logged in, you should be able to leave me a voice message. Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed your time with us this week. Be sure to listen to and support other gaming content creators. There's a whole bunch of other Fallout and Elder Scrolls podcasts out there that are great. If you'd like to connect with me online, hop on over to facebook.com/RKslade Gaming. I run a channel there where I play Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption, Assassin's Creed, of course Fallout, and many other open world RPGs. You can also find the podcast hub at falloutandabout.com. That's falloutandabout.com, all one word. My name is Russ, also known as RKslade. Thank you for joining me for this week's Fallout and About, and I hope to see you next time.
Yes, this is one of my favorite things in the world. Wait a minute, are we already recording? You guys never give me the correct... Oh, somebody's at the door of the studio. Well, hello there, you cute little clown. Why are you laughing hysterically? And why are you pointing a knife at me? On that note, I'm out.